Hi, I'm Dave Lewison with FaceTheWind.com Photography, and I thought I'd try an instructional video today to show you how to make something called a double matte. And what that is basically it's a method of mounting a photograph so that you have two colors, and you can see that closely here with this picture. I've got a darker blue on the outside, a lighter blue on the inside, and that kind of picks up some of the colors in this photo pretty well. I like the way it came out. What's important to do about a double matte is that you need to keep these lines absolutely parallel with each other. If they're off even by a fraction of an inch, your eye will pick up on it very easily. And that's something that's very tricky to do by hand without lots and lots of measurement, and also without some really good equipment that you'll typically find at framing stores. But I'm going to show you how to do this trick using nothing but a regular matte cutter and some good old ingenuity. Now, to do this, you're going to need just a few tools. You're going to need a regular pencil, you're going to need a ruler, and you're going to need a matte cutter. And you can pick these up at most craft stores for about 20 or 30 bucks. I use a more expensive matte cutting alignment guide, but this isn't really necessary. Really, all you need is a ruler and a steady hand. Okay, so I've got my raw material set up here. I've got the photo that I want to matte, which is a nice scene from Zion National Park in Utah. And I've got my two colors of mattes that I want to use. For this one, I'm going to use a nice sky blue as the inner matte, and a slightly darker blue for the outer matte. And that creates kind of a nice border that I'm going for here. So the first step is going to be just to create a regular single matte, which is fairly easy to do. All you really need to do up here is on the back end of your matte, you want to measure out the photo that you're going to be matting, measure its dimensions, and then mark those dimensions in a square on the back of the matte. Okay, so what I've got right now is we've got the edges of this matte, but I cut these myself. I'm not 100% sure they're absolutely square with each other. If I were to measure in on each side the same amount, the lines here might not be parallel. So it's very important that I do a reference off of one corner only. So that I'm going to pick as this corner here. So instead of referencing, instead of going the same amount from each corner, I'm going to go in one distance from one corner, and I'm going to go the entire distance of the photo to the other corner. And what that will do is make sure that these lines are perfectly parallel to each other. So what I've got right now is an outline for the inner matte. You can see I just tested out. I made this particular cut just about an 1/8 inch short of the width of the picture. This is because you want the matte to overlap the picture just a little bit so that it doesn't wrinkle. Did the same thing for the Y dimension as well. So this looks pretty good. Just testing out all four corners to make sure I didn't screw up. Now I'm going to actually cut the matte. So I've got the matte here ready to be cut, and I've got my matte cutter. This is my alignment rig. You could just use a ruler, just basically taped to a table if you want. This just makes it a little easier. The matte here, this is the matte cutter, and this is what's going to create the beveled edge. So I just basically go from one corner to the other, and I make sure I'm always cutting with the left side, the outside of the matte, to my left. Okay, so this is the basic inner matte. This is what the inner matte looks like. And I'm just going to double check it to make sure it's the right size and shape for the picture itself. So it looks good like this. Don't have any picture edges coming up underneath the edges of the matte, so it's the right size. Now we're ready to proceed to the tricky part, which is the double matte. I've got the inner matte basically finished here. And what I need to do is I need to transfer the pattern on this matte to the outer matte. And the reason I'm doing that is because it will make certain that the outer matte will be perfectly parallel to the inner one, even if the inner one isn't perfectly square. Whatever the inner one is, the outer one will be, and that will make the lines perfectly parallel, and it'll make the mat look great. So, how do I do that? Well, I need to establish another reference corner. So, I'm going to use the one I had before. This is the inner mat. This is that circle that I drew. I'm going to arbitrarily pick a corner that matches it on the outer mat. I'm going to draw a circle there. And then what I do is I line the two up such that the bottom edges are perfectly aligned and the left edges are perfectly aligned. So that means that in this particular corner that's marked, the edges are nice and flat with each other. Okay? I need to establish that before I can do anything else. So I'm going to lay it flat now, and I'm going to just double check to make sure nothing shifted. So now this edge is perfectly flat, and this edge is perfectly flat. Now, I'm just going to transfer the pattern. And to do that, I'm going to take my pencil, I'm going to make the lead quite a bit long, just so it's able to get through the mat. And I'm going to hold the pencil very vertically, and just use the inner mat as a guide for the outer one. So what you can see is I've created a pattern on the outer mat, and that's the one I'm going to follow. Now, if I were to just cut this, then I'd have an outer mat that's identical to the inner mat, and that wouldn't be any good. So what I need to do is I need to expand this pattern by about 1/4 inch or so, and that will open up this outer mat and expose some of the inner mat underneath it, and that gives me the nice two-tone color. So I'm going to go with 1/4 inch, and basically all I need to do is measure off of this line 1/4 inch in all directions. Okay, so now I've got my outer cut pattern that I'm going to be using. So this is what I'm actually going to cut now. Now I use tape when it comes to assembling these mats together. It's pretty easy to work with and it holds up pretty well. What I'm going to have to do though is I'm going to have to remove the corners of the inner mat. I'm going to chop these off right about here, and that'll give me enough of a surface so I can tape it to the outer mat. So it's pretty simple. What I'm going to do is chop the corners off. Once again, make sure that this is the inner mat that you're cutting. Okay, so now all I have to do is make sure that I align up my two corners that are referenced to each other, and make sure this is nice and flat on the edges that are next to that corner. Make sure that's flat, and make sure this is flat. Okay, now that it's all lined up, all I have to do is put a piece of tape on the corners to lock it down. Okay, so now I have a mat where the corners and edges are perfectly parallel with each other the whole way around. Now you can see on the back edge that these don't line up at all. This is because I didn't quite cut these blanks the right size, and they weren't quite square when I cut them originally. But as you can see, it doesn't matter if the blanks are a little bit out of shape, you'll still get a good result. All I really need to do is put a little piece of tape on either end. That. And I can picture the frame or position the mat around it. So like that. Sure it's nice and square. And then I push down on the corners to make sure that tape sticks to the mat. And that should be enough just to pick the picture up so I can finish the taping job. There you go. So now this picture is fully matted and ready for framing.